My name is Nashelle Williams, and today I will be talking about appropriating a culture. Black people have evolved from kings and queens to be diminished to people that are taught to be ashamed of what they represent. For centuries, Black people were told that the only way they would be accepted into society was if they adopted European trends like straight hair and fair skin. We as Black people have the ability to take back what's ours. Our culture belongs to us, and we have the right to embrace our culture without feeling shamed or embarrassed about not fitting in. What makes America America is the diversity of cultures and the ability to freely embrace who we are and what we represent. Allowing people to misrepresent any culture without the proper education on why it's wrong sends the wrong message, to our future generations. Cultural appropriation can be defined by dictionary.com as the act of adopting elements of an outside, often minority culture, including knowledge, practices, and symbols, without understanding or respecting the original culture and context. Cultural appropriation takes away the originality and historical significance to those practices in that culture. The term cultural appropriation was found in texts dating back to the 1960s. This term is often used by social activists to call out a person's ignorance, but in recent days seems not to raise concern in society as much as it's used to. Today, time is ruled by social media. With social media being as popular as it is, calling people out on cultural appropriation has become something that people don't take as seriously anymore. This is because of how often people call out others for cultural appropriation. And now it's kind of a trend. You call a person out on cultural appropriation, and most likely that person gets more views and they get more likes. A perfect example of this would be Woah Vicky. She became famous for claiming to be of African descent while also using the N word. Despite her obvious ignorance, she got more popular day by day. And companies actually invested in her, making her rich, endorsing her. And when she decided that she didn't want to be Black anymore, she made a video explaining why she did it, and she disappeared. So this is just an example of Woah Vicky appropriating Black culture, thinking it's cool to use the N word for views and likes. Excuse me. So as you see, Woah Vicky obviously thinks that that is how a Black person talks, and she tried to use some of the urban vernacular. People who also made this type of ignorance popular, people like Cardi B. Honestly, it became trendy to act like this, and a lot of people also mimicked these vernaculars, thinking that it would get them clicks. Another example would be Little Tay. According to everydayfeminism.com, a deeper understanding of cultural appropriation also refers to a particular power dynamic in which members of a dominant culture take elements from a culture of people who have been systematically oppressed by that dominant group. Allowing those dominant cultures to think it's okay to appropriate the cultures that have historically been oppressed by their own saturates the history and culture. It also tells our oppressor that everything that our ancestors fought for was for nothing. I believe it is important for all generations of every walk of life to know where their culture stems from and embrace if they choose to. It is wrong to embrace someone's culture that is not your own, especially if it's for monetary gain. Many people from all cultures have faced hardships that should be celebrated within generations to show respect for what ancestors had to endure in order for us to be free in America. When we allow people to embrace our culture without understanding where it derived from, this shows the person our lack of concern and respect for our ancestry. Cultural appropriation is something that it stems from. Here you see women, blacks, Hispanics, gays, lesbians, Muslims. You can appropriate someone's culture and maybe not even realize it, but that's why it's very important for us to know what we're doing, what we're embracing. And if someone tells us, that they're offended by something that we're doing, we have to be mature enough to, you know, take in consideration that maybe we should be a little bit more educated on the subject when it comes to cultures, especially being in America. This land was built off of many different cultures. I mean, if you look at places like Louisiana, they literally have Creoles, which are a mix between French and Spaniards and African slaves. If we allow people to take our culture, what was all of this for? European colonies enacted laws to distinguish African slaves from their bargaining white populations. These laws were put into place to establish dominance over slaves. This was called the Negro Act, and it was passed in 1740 in South Carolina. This act restricted Black people from doing things as free people, like growing their own food, starting to read, moving freely, assembling in groups, and earning money. This then extended to restricting them from wearing clothing and jewelry that European and Spanish slave owners would wear. African Americans were only allowed to wear things like Negro cloths, duffels, kerseys, onset braids, blue linen, check linen, or coarse garlands, calicos, check cotton, and Scotch plaids. According to Timeline.com, Governor Esteban Rodriguez Mero of Louisiana, which was still a Spanish colony, passed the Edict of Good Government, which required Black women to wear their hair bound and restricted in a handkerchief or a tie-on. This is because our cultural hairstyles gave ancestors a freedom of expression. This expression, through art, began to be a distraction in their communities. And many women feared that this would draw their men to be attracted to the slaves. Around this time, slavery had existed for a while, long enough for slave owners to start mingling and procreating with slaves. And this created something called the mulatto woman at that time, or the Creole woman. And they were often lusted after. And they were predominantly in Louisiana, and they were often traded, and they ended up in other places of the South. This is a theme that is also trendy today in pop culture. This is why we now have people like Kim Kardashian appropriating our culture and trying to pass it off as original. For centuries, Black people were taught to be ashamed of everything that makes them Black. European cultures have diluted our culture so that we accept being called Black when our pigment is obviously brown. European culture has diluted African, Hispanic, and Asian cultures. For centuries, people in these communities were taught that having lighter skin automatically makes you better than someone with darker skin. These types of views on ourselves are something that was passed down from generation to generation because of how our ancestors were oppressed for looking too Black. Now our communities are literally being torn apart because of trending hashtags like light skin versus dark skin. If you look at this picture here, you see the clearly African descent grandmother, her mixed race daughter. Her mixed race daughter had a baby with the Spanish man. Excuse me. And now their baby clearly looks more white than anything. And because of these views and standards, it got to a point where slaves started to want to have babies with the slave masters because they thought that their lineage would be better off if they whitewashed their ancestry. So say because I'm a Black woman and I'm oppressed by the white man. I'll have a baby with the white man, and I'll tell my child to have a baby with the white man. So that way, that child and every child after them continues to procreate with white men. And now the blackness is gone. So now that family doesn't have to worry about ever being oppressed by the white man because they now are the white man. This is an example of light skin versus dark skin, something that started trending some years back. And I just wanted to put this here because, you know, you got light skin versus dark skin, but then you have two European women, obviously, and we all look black. To everyone else, we are black. It doesn't matter if we're light, it doesn't matter if we're dark. We all faced the same challenges. We all were oppressed by the same people. We all were taken basically from our homes and forced into a country to work. We were looked at something that was lesser than an animal. So when you think about that, it just kind of makes you think for a second. Just some more examples of Black women who had children with slave owners. And most times when women had babies with slave owners, it was against their will. This wasn't something that they did willingly. As stated before, mixed race women were prominent in these communities. Excuse me. Were prominent in these communities because of slave masters' infidelities with slaves. Often children were conceived as a result of slave masters forcing themselves on slaves. This created the mixed race woman. That is what is trending today's time as well. And as you can see, mixed race men trend as well. As you can see, this country wasn't built for us. It was built to destroy every act of our culture. When you think about Black culture, do more positive or do more negative thoughts pop into your mind? Can you name one thing that has been originated in Black culture that Black people didn't have to fight for in order to do? Every expression of our culture has to be defended, and that shouldn't happen, especially in the land of the free. We were brought here to the land of the free in chains, stripped of our cultures, and diminished to something worthless, lesser than animals. Simply being able to show our hair, let alone wear them in cornrows, was considered something illegal. African American children still get sent home from school for wearing culturally appropriate hairstyles, being told that it's a distraction to wear braids, while people like the Kardashians are posting the same styles online for monetary gain. These styles give social media influencers that mixed race look that has been trending since the 1700s, appropriating our culture by injecting themselves for bigger lips, hips, butts, cheeks, are a slap in the face to women like Sarah Barton, who was promised a life of fortune and then taken to Europe as a slave to be exhibited naked to men and women around Europe just because of her curvaceous physique. She was paraded around as part of a circus act when she was 16 until she ended up being forced to prostitute herself in Paris at private soirees, where she became the true sex object, believing that in due time, she would be given the money she had made. What makes us Black has been exploited by others for their own monetary gain for centuries. It is time for us to wake up and continue to fight that was started many years ago. Allowing people to appropriate your culture, my culture, our culture is a slap in the face to the ancestors that fought for us to be where we are. Allowing people to appropriate our culture is us waving our white flag to the oppression and stereotypical thoughts based off of color and our skin. We are brown, and the only way to show that we are equal is to stand by our own culture. Always remember, if we fight amongst ourselves, how will we find time to fight against our oppressor? Thank you. My name is Naysha Williams, and I'm sorry that was shaky. I'm sick.